We are recording. Okay, so now tonight we're talking about ethical practices and professionalism. So whenever we think about ethical practices within a yoga practice, the things that typically emerge within yoga philosophy and yoga books is the yamas and niyamas. And right now I can't find my book, but there's literally a book that I would recommend called the Yamas and Niyamas. If anybody here is looking for reading over the summer, I have a library that you can kind of check these books out. Whether it's the Yamas and Niyamas, I have all different kinds of books. So please, before the end of the year, let me know. You can kind of swing by the admin building and check those books out. But the Yamas and Niyamas, I would recommend that read, especially if you're wanting to learn more about ethical practices and how that's kind of developed inside of the yogic world. Oop. So just kind of to reiterate, right, the why we do this is to really balance all these sheaths, right? We want to also be able to understand these koshas, so these different pieces of the body, so to speak, right? And a part of that human experience is we have our physical body, our breath and energy body, our feelings and emotions, our cognitions and beliefs, bliss and joy. And typically in yoga readings, you'll read mostly those five. You'll see some that may have seven, eight. The one with I rest, which we kind of learned a little bit throughout this teacher training, is the ego I-ness, which is the one that they kind of added, which really focuses on the ego inside of the person, as well as another one of those layers of what makes up a person. And then how do we build energy, right? Pranayama, I know we focused a lot on this. We did our mindfulness practice. We did our I rest practice. We did the breathing practices. So we've done a lot of work in prana because that is really the life force behind what we do. And you know what I like about this particular drawing is it really shows the different pranayamas, right? The different ones that are out there, and then where they kind of live inside of the body and where you need to build that energy. So if one is not feeling good, then there's exercises dedicated to this that you could easily look up and integrate into your life. So again, whenever we think about that, right, this is upward moving energy, right? If you think about it, it's all coming up to this space to go out of your body or in your body, right? So this is kind of that upward moving energy. Then you have prana, which is this piece, which is the inward moving energy, right? And then we have samona, which is the balancing energy, which is right here in the middle, right? Kind of keeping your core where you stay balanced. Apnea, which is down here, which is downward moving energy, which makes sense because this is where your bowels, intestines, stomach, all that stuff is that kind of pushes out the stuff that we don't have or don't need anymore. And then the outside of our bodies is all this circulating energy going on all the time. So these are the different energies in different places in our body. And these five vital winds is kind of what they call this piece right here. And then what we're trying to do with yoga is always balance the chakras. I know we didn't dive too deep into the chakras. I do have a chakra book as well. So another piece, if you want to read over the summer, you can check out our chakra book. It really breaks them down, talks about different exercises you can do to balance that particular chakra. But this is a good way to think about yoga is we're trying to level out and understand the different layers of what makes us up. So that's the koshas. We build our energy to be able to do all that through our pranayama practices. And then we're doing it all to try to balance our chakras. So that's kind of the rundown of what kind of the ins and outs of what yoga is. And how we do that is what we've been learning through the 8 limbs of yoga. And at this point, we have covered almost all 8 limbs except for the yamas and niyamas and samdahi, I think is how you say that, but pure consciousness. And we've kind of been touching on this a little bit throughout. But the big picture here is really just creating, that's almost like if you were looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is kind of that top part of the pyramid, right? That self-actualization, but this is kind of what you're heading towards, and kind of constantly using that as a balancing tool, right? And kind of have those nadis and man, now I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, this is all about balancing as well. But whenever we come down through here, we covered asanas, which is postures and poses. So whenever we were doing the practice, whenever we were doing pyramid pose or warrior one, that is an asana, right? That is what we're doing. That is kind of our physical aspect of it. Pranayama, our breathing. So as we're moving with breath, as we're grounding ourselves with breath, right, we're building that energy up so that we can move again. So every time we exhale to move into a certain place and we inhale, that's new energy within that asana. So that pranayama, we're constantly building that energy so that we can move our body in those asanas and other things. And then we have here, which is really kind of like a mindfulness practice. In meditation, we've done this a lot at this point. Hopefully everybody has been able to knock out that mindfulness certification and been able to kind of dive into what that is. And it's really just kind of that non-judgmental stance. Here it says a disassociation of external environments, but I would say it's that kind of approaching things non-judgmentally, right? Not putting labels on things and those types of things, so that mindfulness practice. Then we have concentration in mindfulness. And then we also have meditation, which we've done a lot as well. The I-rest practice is meditation. I would highly recommend if you want to learn more about our meditation. I do have a book at the office that is called Yoga Nidra. So if meditation is what's really calling you, then the Yoga Nidra book would be the one to read. I'll say out of all the books, that one's probably wrote up the most because I took a lot of notes in that book. But definitely you can read it, and if you like reading notes, you'll be able to see my notes. So now we've been able to cover all of these different 8 limbs. Now we're going to talk about today where the yamas and niyamas kind of stay there. And if you look up here, it's ethical rules. And then here I should probably put in there that this is ethical behaviors, right? Or the behaviors that align to those ethical rules. So the yamas and the niyamas, right? The yamas and niyamas are ethical foundations of yogic practice and teachings. You'll see the yamas and niyamas a lot in ethical practice. I'll say there's a difference between these ethics and the ethics that you have to adhere to with Yoga Alliance. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. This is for yogic practice, right? No accrediting body is going to tell you that you have to adhere to the yamas and niyamas, right? It's just not something that they would do. So again, it's not really an ethical practice of guidelines that you have to adhere to, but probably more of if you're building a yogic lifestyle or that type of lifestyle, these are the principles that would help build self-awareness and grow that self-awareness and inner freedom from being able to put labels on a lot of different things. Oh, and one thing I want to add was, this comes out of the Yoga Sutras. So almost every single yama or niyama has accompanying sutras that could also play into it as well. So methods of application. So whenever we think of the yamas, and the reason why I wanted to cover this first before we really dive into the yamas and niyamas is for you all to start thinking of how you can incorporate some of these practices either into your life now and or into your yoga classes or whatever you're going to be doing, right? So with methods of application right here is really just practical ways of being able to do that. So like journaling, cueing, right? Whenever we're in there, right? I think I may have said this in the practice is, we don't want to be too competitive. If I didn't say it, I know I've said it over times, right? But we kind of also want to cue in a way that gives people an invitation too. So being able to do that, but I'd also say intention setting is another big piece, which I know we did in that practice. And then also behavior modeling, right? Just like anything else. We align really to the koshas, which is ethics and wisdom, of kind of looking at those koshas and how we might be able to add those layers of the person into our practice, right? And how we're going to accompany that. And then here I put offer in the plan of care as a practice or layer. And what I mean by that is we have to layer these different pieces on to be able to help people truly understand the yamas and niyamas, and to also be able to, I guess, understand how they fit into their life to be able to create that self-awareness and that inner freedom. All right, so the yamas. The yamas is restraints for proper conduct, right? This is more of, the ethics behind it, right? Social ethics and action, if you could really say anything about that, right? So ethics show up in how you speak to your students, right? Manage the space and uphold some of those boundaries. And I would say boundaries is a big one. Growth, not judgment, right? Instead of shaming a student for not being able to engage, right? Recognize that withdrawal might be a trauma response. Withdrawal may also be an ego response, right? Is that they can't accomplish that pose, so now they're withdrawing. And to give people that space, and it's okay, right? Respond with patience, right? And also to be present during that entire time. And I have a few quotes up here, right? The yamas are not about moral law. They are part of the practice. There is no room for guilt here, but plenty of room for growth. And that's kind of the mindset of the yamas, is we're not going to penalize people. We're not going to pass judgment for whatever they did, whatever's going on, and we're going to be able to show up with a non-judgmental stance. Now we come to yama, the first limb of Ashtanga yoga. We should remember here that each of the 8 limbs is equal to each other and are necessary. So again, another big piece of that is remembering that the 8 limbs of yoga, each limb is just as important as the other. Although many people get into yoga through the physical practice of yoga, right? Going to a yoga studio, but that practice is just as equal to the yamas or the niyamas or even meditation, mindfulness, right? All those other ones. Now, whenever we start to break down, there are actually 5 different yamas. We're going to go through each one of those. There is no way that I'll be able to say all of these by any means, but we'll talk through them, right? And here is ahimsa, is what I think this says. And this one really stands for nonviolence and non-harming. So here is really allowing and giving people permission in their practice to not have to listen to every word that you say, right? I think we talk about that a lot, right? We give people permission that if they can't meet a pose, we give them alternative poses, we give them props, and or we give them the permission to sit in child's pose instead, or maybe in downward facing dog. For me, I would never sit just in downward facing dog. I would go to child's pose. But remember that, right? That is one way of expressing the yamas within our practice, is to give those choices, to give those offerings, and then also to use that gentle language, right? If it's calling to your body today, then do this practice. If it's not, then don't do this practice. If it's calling for you to be able to do warrior one whenever lifting your arms up above your head, but then if you got shoulder issues, that may not be calling you today, right? It may be, I don't want to put this in the atmosphere, but it could be snowing, right? And then you might be a little bit more stiff. So lifting your arms up may not be a good thing for today. So listen to your body, give that invitational language, and then avoid competitive cues, right? Or comparisons. I feel like competition sometimes hurt people, unless it's deliberately there for a competition. If we said, hey, we're going to go into this for a competition, that may be a little bit different, because you're going in that with an intention to be competitive. But really, whenever we're just practicing yoga and living a yoga life, competitiveness is not necessarily a quality that you kind of carry into that practice. All right, the next yama, Satya, is what I think this is. Again, who knows if it is, but if anybody is better at Sanskrit, please chime in. I'm not trying to butcher it on purpose. So this one is truthfulness, right? And here I put on here, avoid toxic positivity. They talk a lot about this in the yogic world, is a lot of times, and especially with Iyengar, he talks a lot about this. So if you ever want to read a little bit about some of those pieces, they talk about Western society, and they don't say it, but kind of that strength-based approach, right? Always trying to find a strength out of everything else, but you forget to validate the person's suffering, the person's struggle. You forget to validate, all the things that that person really needs to be able to move forward. And instead, it's almost like we gaslight that opportunity without validating it and move right into this toxic positivity mindset. So keep that in mind as we kind of move forward as well. Is really truthfulness is also being honest with people in those moments. Validate what's going on with them, validate their experience, validate all those other things, and then that'll make them feel like you're more truthful than not. So model truth and self-talk, right? Share how you're adapting to your own needs. So, one thing that I probably could have done is towards the end, I was probably taking longer breaks and taking more breaths, right? Because I was starting to run out of breath, which is normal, right? But I could easily say, oh man, I really need this breath today, right? I really need that breath in this moment and take it in, right? That positive self-talk and also showing people what you need in that moment is also very critical for what we do. The next yama, Asteya, I think is how you say this, Asteya, is non-stilling. And a lot of times people think of this as literally the stilling of a physical item. And that's not necessarily the case at all. This is really, you could be stilling people's time. That's always a good example that's used in teacher trainings, is if your class goes over what your allotted time was, right, that is stilling people's time at the end of the day. So, if anything, you would want to end early so you give people their time back. But also that could be stilling too if people are paying for that class, right? So there's so many different variables that you can kind of look at whenever it comes to time and our money. But remember, it's not just about stilling a tangible thing. It could literally be stilling other things as well. Avoid copying another teacher's sequence without acknowledgement, right? So if you're taking somebody's, give credit just like anything else, right? Kind of like the plagiarism rules, right? If you take a sequence from Ashtanga yoga, you should say this one is an Ashtanga yoga practice. If you create it yourself, don't necessarily need to say it, but you can kind of say this is a Charlie special or a Karen special or a whoever special, and be able to name it that way. And don't push students to disclose personal stories. That's the reason why whenever I set intentions and we talk about, the heartfelt desire and those types of things, I don't have people talk about that in class, right? Because that's unique to them. And if they want to bring it up, they can. We always have that type of space to be able to do it, but really, that's something in their mind that they need to be able to do. And we never want to be able to hurt anybody, right? We don't want to steal their safe space away from them as well, right? So keep that in mind. There's probably all different kinds of things that is kind of in this non-stealing mindset, but remember that. I'd also can't remember if it's this one or if it is, I think it is this one, but also, no, it's not. It's the last one. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So this one, I'm not even going to try to say. Actually, I will. Brahmacharya. Brahmacharya is what I'll say. This one is really the conserving vital energy, not excessing that energy, not really taking on too much of that energy. Here we're talking about really teaching pace, right? And you don't have to push to the edge. Check in and see what feels sustainable. Because every time we push to the edge, again, unless that is the intention, right? Michael Jordan did not become Michael Jordan without pushing the edge and pushing the envelope, but he did it also in a sustainable way for him. So again, you can still push, but you also need to conserve that energy. And whenever we talk about conserving energy, that also kind of goes into that that stilling mindset, right? If we're stilling too much energy out of the world, then we might be taking it away from somebody else. Um, and also on here it says encourage rest without guilt. A lot of times we always feel guilty about rest. I also feel like there's a time whenever people have this competitiveness on who sleeps the least, right? Who gets up the earliest, um, all those types of things. And it's kind of a toxic way to kind of approach being able to do that, right? It creates that guilt, it creates that shame whenever somebody does sleep 8 to 10 hours, then and they're completely rested, feel good, and everybody's like, "Oh man, you slept forever," right? And it makes people start to feel guilty. So, again, not being able to do that because that's really being able to conserve our energy and be there. And Brett is old, so he goes to bed. He goes to bed early and gets up early. So he's got that blue plate special for sure. But I do too. I get up super early. I'm an early bird and I start early too. So, I think that's also important to go to bed early, like Brett does. All right, let's see, where was I at? Okay, man, there's no way I'm going to try this one. A paragraha. That's what we'll go with. So this one is the last one of the yamas, and this one is non-greed and non-hoarding. And a lot of times, whenever we think about this, people think hoarding automatically and they just think of like, the show Hoarders and they think of, those types of things. But literally, I think hoarding here also is a place of um, working too much, right? To save money. Now again, unless you have an intention for that, let's just say you have medical bills that need to be paid off or you're trying to pay off your house, right? Then working more, you know, is for an intention to do something better for your family and yourself and all that other stuff. So I'm not talking about those moments, but I'm talking about pushing to save money just to be saving money, pushing for a promotion just to get a promotion, pushing for those types of things, and it's not really intrinsically valuable, but also hoarding all those resources. Another thing that I see happen and is used here is food as well, right? Is a lot of times we want to hoard food, and instead of whenever I say hoard, I mean it in the light of this, is we get a plate, and in many cultures in America, we are told to clean our plate every single night, right? Well, that may not be what you need to do, right? We should make food that is really just fills us up, or, maybe not even completely full, but, gives us the nourishment that we need, and not necessarily that we put a bunch of food on a plate and you're going to eat it because I told you to. Right? And doing those types of things, right? That is an overabundance. That is, that non-hoarding. We don't need to do that because in the big picture, it could be taking resources away from other people at the same time. And that's the real big picture of what this one means is don't take resources so much that you're hoarding them. And even though you don't see the direct impact of hoarding those resources, other people may suffer because of hoarding that you may not see. So the goal is to not hoard those resources and only use what you need. All right, so that's the yamas. Anybody have any questions about the yamas? Any reflections on the yamas? Yeah, go ahead.
Would this last one have to do with like hoarding ideas as well, possibly? Like when I
I
first
think
started teaching, like none of the teachers wanted to share their ideas to me when I was a new teacher.
yes, I would say 100% that is. And that's almost the set you up for failure mindset, right? Is I'm going to hoard these ideas because I had to figure it out on my own anyway. So you're going to have to figure it out on your own. And absolutely, right? Whenever we think about that, who is that benefiting? Nobody, right? It's not benefiting the kids. It's not even benefiting the person that's holding the resources, right? Because they're possibly and potentially going to create more work for the building by them not sharing those resources, right? So absolutely, I would say that would be it. And then definitely that mindset of the other person of feeling like they are hoarding it And whether it is an I gotcha mindset or not, it still kind of feels that way. So it's always going to have that undertone to the person's perception who's receiving it. So I don't know if that was your perception, but I would imagine it would be hard not to feel that way.
Yeah, it just felt yucky. It
Yeah,
didn't seem to come from a good place. And I try to
yeah,
give people the benefit of the doubt, but sometimes people discover a good thing and then it makes them look good, so they don't want to share it with others because then everyone will look good and then they're not special anymore.
that's right. That's actually a good way to word it too, is they don't feel special if they were to give those resources away. I worked hard, I got acknowledgement for this. You should just do it or learn it on your own or not do it and just praise me for it, right? That sounds very selfish and all those other things, but that's the way it feels. And definitely that's the way not being ethical will make you feel, which is yucky or icky or however you want to say it, right? Is whenever we start to blur those boundaries with ethics, and especially in these lights, right? Of not being, the non-violence, the non-harming, being truthful, not stealing, right? The conserving vital energy, right? Non-hoarding, like all of these. Like if you're not doing these and you experience it, I would say you're gonna feel icky, right? Even if you're the one that's doing that, right? You might not, you might feel egotistical in those moments. You might feel the ego kind of emerging, but really other people around you are feeling icky. So I think that's a good word, icky. So yeah, thank you for adding that. That's just great. Let's see, any other reflections? All right. Well, let's move into the Niyamas. And these are more rules and guidelines, right? So kind of the doing your private practice, right? This is the actual like ritual of breath work using mantras. I know we didn't go over mudras, but this would lead into a mudra discussion, right? Practicing those mudras, all those types of things would really be the practice of ethics, right? That's how you practice it. That's how you calm your mind. That's how you get that inner peace, right? Is doing the niyamas. So the niyamas are not a practice to make a person more spiritual or more holy. They are practice to help create life where there is room for spirit. So really, this is kind of creating the space so that you can be spiritual, so that you can build an ethical practice and lifestyle. And that's really what this does, is it creates that space to be able to do it. So again, the yamas are more of kind of the what, and this is really the how you're going to do it. So the first one is Sucha, which stands for Sachu, maybe Sacha, stands for purity. And here, you maintain a clean and welcoming physical space, set emotional boundaries, don't absorb other people, right? That transference and countertransference. But I'd say here too is having a tidy workspace, all those types of things. I'd say most people here, if you were being honest, if you have a dirty workspace, you work better whenever you have a cleaner workspace, right? Things like that. But I'll also add here people who have a yogic lifestyle. There's certain groups of people in those lifestyles, and maybe some people have noticed that. But I have one friend, his name is Maha, and me and him was building a Ayurvedic practice together and doing different things and building the program. And whenever we were talking about it, he gets up at 4 o'clock every single morning and takes a shower and then does his yogic practice. So a lot of people will take showers. They wake up early because it's the purity of the morning, is kind of the idea of waking up early before the sun rises. And then you do the practice clean. And a lot of people practice yoga that way. They'll take showers before they actually go practice their yoga. So you have that group of people, and then you have other people who just shower before their practice. They don't have to get up before the sun rises. And then you'll see some of those people that will take showers before their yoga practice. And that is, when I say yogic practice, I don't necessarily mean using poses and postures and the asana side of things. It really is, even if they're going to go do an eye rest practice or a yoga nidra practice or a meditation practice, they're going to take a shower and clean themselves. Now, sometimes what you'll see is they'll have a bowl with water and they'll just kind of wash their face, wash their hands, wash their feet, and then go practice yoga. Um, so that's kind of the purity of some of the physical practices that you may see. But I think in today's world, that really translates to, right, clean your space before you practice, right? If you noticed in my practice space, I had my mat laid out flat. I had the strap, which was rolled up nice and neat. I had my meditation stool in the middle. I had my bolster on one side and my blanket on the other. If I were to have my blocks, they would have been at the other end of my mat where my strap wasn't, right? So I keep my space nice and clean. I think it's more about those types of things in today's practice, right? Also, making sure that you're not dirty all the time, right? Taking a shower, cleaning yourself. I think we could all say we feel better when we're clean in general, not just our workspaces. But if you hadn't showered in a day, 2, 3, 4, you start to feel it, right? Just like whenever you don't brush your teeth for a day and you start to feel that rough stuff over the top of your teeth build up, your body's doing the same thing, right? It just kind of makes you feel icky. And if it doesn't, then it may be time to start talking about, other issues that may be going on in your life, right? Like depression and other things like that. All right, Santocha. Man, I'm butchering these. So I apologize to anybody who speaks Sanskrit. I don't mean to do it to poke fun of the culture by any means. I just have a hard time talking. So contentment, right? Encourage students to celebrate their bodies now, not once they're flexible. And I think that is such a good statement in the yogic world as people come um, into yogic practices. And the one thing that I will say, if anybody's ever been in a yoga studio or seen people kind of coming in and out on a regular basis, you'll always find one or two people who are there just to be able to say that they can do certain poses. And one is always a headstand. Everybody wants to do a headstand. But not everybody's built to do a headstand, right? Not everybody needs to do a headstand. But for some reason, that's always like one of the things that people come to a studio and you just see them try over and over and over again until they try to get it or they give up, one of the two. So, but I think it's really being able to know your body, know the limitations of your body, and allow yourself to accept that with grace, right? And I think that's the biggest piece is to accept your limitations with grace. And I don't think I added that into this practice, but typically you'll hear me say that in a practice, right? Is if you can't do that, then accept that, right? If you can't do that, then accept it with grace. You know your limitations. You know where you're at right now. And maybe next time you'll be there. So, just an easy way to kind of integrate that into your practice. Use affirmations like this is enough or right now is okay. This is what my body's calling right now, and that's okay, right? To be able to give people that permission is powerful, but to be able to do it yourself and be that leader in front of a class, I think I did say here, I think it was pigeon pose whenever you have the option to kind of turn it into a dancer pose by reaching back and grabbing your foot. I was like, oh, I can't do that, right? So being able to say that in front of your class, but I gave you all the option that if you all can do it, then you can move right into it, right? And I think that's the most important thing. We give them the options, which goes back to the yamas, and then in the niyamas, we're now leading by example as well, right? So in this contentment, I'm okay with not being able to reach back and grab my leg. I'm okay with not being able to bend down and putting my hands flat down on the ground and keeping my leg straight. Like I accept my limitations with grace. And I think that's really what this one is really focused on as well. And not just in yoga, right? All of these principles also translate off the mat. You'll hear a lot of people in the yogic world say that is on the mat, off the mat. And a lot of these things is meant to translate off the mat, right? Whereas asanas is pretty much always on the mat, right? But here, this should translate to off the mat as well. Tapas, I can get this one, All right, that's an easy one. Got that Sanskrit word. So this one is self-discipline, and this is for the ones who are in the coaching course where I really see the two merging together, is you can help people with that self-discipline, help them gear in action based on a long-term behavioral goal and help them get there, right? But this is the discipline over time. Create sustainable routines instead of pushing through pain. Because another thing on another note of that is if you are constantly pushing towards pain and you're constantly doing that, most people are going to quit yoga pretty fast. If every time you fold forward and the instructor is telling you that you need to be at a 90-degree angle or below a 45-degree angle even, and you just can't get there, more than likely you're going to quit yoga if they're using that type of language, right? We need to be able to use language that includes that pain because we basically want to be able to touch pain, right? Maybe even nudge it a little bit if we're trying to recover from something, but we never want to go full into the pain, right? So that's another way to think of it as a yoga instructor is you want to be able to touch that pain, maybe ease off of it a little bit, but over time maybe nudge that pain a little bit more and kind of push through it if it's in a recovery mode. If you're not really in a recovery mode, that pain could lead to injury, right? So remember that too, as pain can lead to injury. Um, and then celebrate progress over perfection. So whenever they do nudge that pain a little bit, and now instead of not being able to touch the ground, now their fingertips are touching the ground, right? We want to celebrate that success and say, wow, you're really so much more flexible than when we started. All right, and I will not say this one either. But this one is kind of the self-study. You'll hear it referred to as spiritual study. That doesn't necessarily equate, and the reason why I hate to call it spiritual study is because people automatically associate that with like reading the Bible, right? Or something along those lines. It doesn't have to be a religious study, but really, what are you doing to help yourself self-study? What are you doing to learn about yourself? This could be journaling. I think I may have mentioned this to people. Is I actually every morning now do a stoic journal. So I'm going down that path. So I'm learning about myself. Wouldn't necessarily call it religion, but I would call it a look inside, right? A self-awareness tool that I'm trying to do. So again, it doesn't have to necessarily be religion, but what are you doing for a self-study that helps increase that self-awareness? And then teach that noticing inner patterns is a win, right? If you notice that every single time you get frustrated whenever you do math homework with your own kid, right? I do. That maybe I shouldn't be the one teaching math homework, but I notice it and then I can kind of stop that from happening, right? I still can help with the math homework, but then I know going into that I need to be able to check my emotions, right? Because I know this is not a good pattern, but then I can also fix those things too. So but I notice it first without trying to change it, and then by not trying to change it, we can find a path forward that can hopefully be beneficial for everybody. All right, and moving into the last niyama, I will definitely not try to say this one. So if anybody wants to take a shot at this one, you're more than welcome to. But this one is a life of dedication. Now here, another thing that you'll refer to, or you'll see it referred to as surrender to God. Again, I think the interpretation is different. I think it's more of a life of dedication, a life of I am driving towards my intention and my heartfelt desire, more so than it is surrendering to God. And here, you can offer guided meditations on trust and letting go. Use mantras, like I am held together. I release control of this, of guilt. I release control of this, shame I'm feeling, whatever it is, right? You can almost set these different mindfulness and mantra practices around that piece. but pretty straightforward. Let's see, any reflections or anything? Because that was the last Niyama. But any reflections on the Niyamas? So remember, the Yamas is the what, and this is the how, right? The Niyamas are the how. So the way to kind of integrate these into your own practice or into your life. Whenever we look at this, right, we have daily practice prompts. It's super easy to be able to implement something like this, right? You could have daily prompts of what yama I'm embodying today, or you could even say, I am going to find opportunity today to recognize this yama, right? Or whatever it is. You can, there's so many different ways you can incorporate that. And then also reflect on ethical patterns in your own practice, right? And kind of noticing those pieces, kind of looking at it and using the language around it and prompting it. Cueing with conscious language. I think we've kind of talked a lot about that, right? Is every time you're cueing, right, use language like you might want to explore. If your body's calling, maybe you would want to do this pose. If not, maybe go back into child's pose, right? You're giving them those options. And then you can also align your voice with all these different pieces, right? Align the voice with being non-judgmental, align the voice with non-confrontational, conserving energy, non-hoarding, things like that. And then the weekly integration challenge. You can always do things like that, like, hey, we're going to incorporate this. You can almost name this is going to be the theme, right? Is non-stilling. So that's going to be our theme today, and we're going to mainly be talking about time. We're going to give forgiveness for the people who still our time, right? Go over on meetings, whatever it is, make us look for things that we shouldn't have to look for, all those types of things. And I'm gonna show grace to those people, right? Or it could just be as simple as I'm going to find grace for myself during these times. So however that is, right? Class design and themes, kind of, I think that goes right into line with that, what I was just talking about. But also using closing reflections based on weekly ethics. So if you have a weekly class that you're doing, you could almost close on a new ethical frame, right? Like even character strong in the schools now, right? Is we could even end on a character strong characteristic in there, right? And we could add that into our themes, which would be right in the line with the yamas and niyamas. Self-inquiry and group discussion, just another way to be able to do it, but using your own self-reflections inside of a group discussion can also be powerful because that is leading by example at that point. Do not, I would say though, be cautious of self-disclosures in general, right? Self-disclosures can also lead to countertransference, which is also, against some of these yamas and niyamas, right? We don't want to absorb that from somebody else, so we kind of want to keep those boundaries, but still understand that self-inquiry can also lead to some of those self-disclosures that helps us show that we're leading by example for it. And of course, encourage boundaries as self-care. We're probably all terrible at self-care. We're in the helping profession. 9 times out of 10, we're always terrible at self-care. Um, but I will say, it's something that we should practice, right? Set that boundary up. If we know that we need a boundary of I need to be home at this time and I'm not going to answer my phone, to be able to set that boundary and then also be non-judgmental that you set that boundary. I also think that we live in a time and have lived in a time to where the obligation is that you owe your employment something, right? Other than what you're already providing them, right? So we automatically live in a time that doesn't allow us to create an environment or justify an environment for self-care. I think it's getting better. I don't want to take anything away from that, but historically we lived in a time to where, you know, your job was family and that you should give your job just as much time and dedication as you do your own family. I do think that's changing, but again, create those boundaries as we can despite the environment sometimes, I guess is what I'm saying, are the historical precedents behind it. Let's see, does anybody have any questions about yamas, niyamas, anything in between, how to incorporate it into your practice or anything. Any questions at all or comments on the Yamas and Niyamas at this point? Well, that's too easy. Okay. So with no questions, I'll say now that is the ethical practice of a yogic practice that has no accrediting bodies, that has no principles that you have to adhere to, that you would sign up for, nothing like that. But now, for each of you, for everybody who finishes everything and gets everything in, and we're done at the end of the 27th. I know some people may go beyond that because they need to knock out practices and all that type of stuff. But overall, whenever you're done, you have the option to sign up for Yoga Alliance. Yoga Alliance is an accrediting body. I think we talked about this on day one and kind of looked at their website. But you will be eligible to become a member. I forget what that price is. It's over $100 a year. I want to say it's about $150 a year. And then you become a member. To become a member, right, you have to complete a 200-hour training, which all of you are doing now. And then you're going to have to adhere to these principles and understand that ethical practice. So whenever you look here, we have, the adherence to applicable law. What that really means is you have to stay within your scope of practice under your state. There is no state right now that requires you be certified through Yoga Alliance to practice yoga or to teach yoga. Most of the time, whenever you look at a job, they'll say that you need a 200-hour certification through Yoga Alliance or equivalent. So sometimes you don't even have to have that to go to a gym and practice that certification. But there are laws that you may still fall under, and you need to know those. In Colorado, I don't know of any laws that stand out there. But again, get liability insurance if you're going to be practicing away from the school and those types of things, right? Just make sure that I would say a very fundamental one of this, at least in Colorado, again, there's no state law, but I'd say stay in the scope of practice, whether you're with Yoga Alliance or not, stay within their scope of practice and you'll always be safe because whether they are required or you're required to have it or not, they are the gold standard for the scope of practice. So stay within that scope of practice, right? You can't provide therapy, you can't provide diagnosis, any of that type of stuff. You have to be knowledgeable, those types of things. That's really the state law at this point. And then the other ones are kind of laws are policies that they have. So here, the second principle is you have to stay within their scope of practice. So you're going to sign a scope of practice under Yoga Alliance, and then you have to adhere to that. If you go outside of that, I don't know if you'd necessarily get sued, but Yoga Alliance would probably kick you out or take some type of action against you. So again, the scope of practice, Yoga Alliance will have that on their website. We went over it on day one, but stay within that scope of practice. Principle 3, they have an anti-harassment policy, right? You can't harass people no matter what. And let's see, the next one, no sexual misconduct. You can't sleep with your students unless you have a past relationship, I think is what they say in their sexual misconduct. If you have another license, it's usually the most strictest. For me, being a social worker, we can't have sexual relationships with any of our clients ever. So like that's literally the rule that I would take in place. But as far as Yoga Alliance goes, they say you can't do that with a student that you didn't have a past relationship with. Let's see, do no harm, right? I think that's self-explanatory. We hear that a lot, but you don't intentionally do harm. Here is one thing that I know I've said it here before, but I'll say it again. In my opinion, you should never have to touch anybody to put them in a pose. If you can't talk them into that pose and you can't demonstrate what that pose looks like for them, then I would never touch them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after we're done with this presentation. But touching, it's in your scope of practice as a yoga teacher, but use it cautionly. I would not make that a priority, and I would try not to touch people at all. Let's see, principle 6 is actively include all individuals. We covered inclusivity in the last class. That literally is one of the ethical principles within Yoga Alliance. So if you go through them, you're going to have to be inclusive, which you should be anyway. However, if for some reason you have a bias towards a person or a group of people, whatever that is, be aware of that bias, and maybe not do specialized groups for those people to try to overcompensate for that bias, even though you're aware of it. I see people in the helping profession do things like that a lot, to where it's almost that overcompensation, which then becomes into non-genuineness and kind of goes against some of the yamas and niyamas of ethical practices as a yoga teacher, or as a yogic person. Let's see. Principle 7, respect student-teacher relationships, right? Again, can't have sex with them. You shouldn't be cussing at them. You should be treating them with respect, because there is that power dynamic there, whether we like it or not, right? There's always going to be that power dynamic. Principle 8 is maintain honesty in communication. I feel like that one's self-explanatory, right? Don't try to hide fees and try to hit them with fees later. That's probably the main one of how it gets violated, is they have hidden fees and things. I think now there's laws that kind of protect around those hidden fees, but yeah, so these are the Yoga Alliance ethical principles that you will have to basically sign. I think you actually sign each principle, or there may be like one sheet that you sign, but you initial each principle. But regardless, you're going to be going through these principles, and you're going to sign your name to that. So that is the, I guess, next standard of ethical practice. The yamas and niyamas is more of a guiding principle, whereas this is, ethical standards that you have to adhere to if you choose to go through Yoga Alliance. So now, one thing that I did want to add in here, and I may have talked a little bit about this in the past, but right now in the yogic world, if you have not heard about some of the ethical issues that go on in the yoga field, I highly recommend everyone here looking that up, especially since most people here are women, because mostly women are victims, or have been perpetrated against, by somebody in the yoga field, typically a male teacher. It's happened multiple times. They literally got documentaries on it on YouTube. On Netflix, and probably YouTube as well. Whenever I started to integrate yoga into a healthcare system, the biggest pushback we had was because of the ethical, our lack of ethical boundaries that typically men have had within the yoga field. And most of them are people that are considered gurus at the end of the day, or whatever you want to put that title on. So I err on the side of caution in the yoga field for everybody, not just women, but typically, again, women are more perpetrated against in even the yoga field, than any other, and then I won't say any other field, but definitely there. And I always now tell this example inside of iRest. And I know I've mentioned ethical things and barriers within iRest. And I'll go ahead and tell you now kind of what happened with iRest. So the executive director, Dr. Richard Miller, he was pursuing a woman that worked for him. She said no to his advances multiple times. She spoke up, which was really good. But then he put an NDA on her to where she couldn't speak up if she wanted to basically keep her job and other benefits. I don't want to make it sound like it was just to keep her job. It was a whole laid out process, and a very legalized process. She felt comfortable with it. He felt comfortable with it. The institution felt comfortable with it. Um, but what happened was he continued to pursue her after a while. I don't know what that while was. Let's just say it was a year. And then he started to pursue her again. Pursue is probably loosely out there at this point. I don't know what that means based on their standards. But eventually, she broke the NDA and told the story because he continued to pursue her and continued to pursue her. So I don't know if technically he broke the NDA, however that works, but the NDA was broken. Um, and then she, voiced her opinion saying, I feel like this is a gross abuse of his power, being the executive director and founder of iRest. Most people agreed. However, he is still the executive director for iRest and the board of directors. He may not be the executive director now. I know there was some talks of putting someone else in place, but I think that's a prime example. In my opinion, he tried to quiet somebody from speaking up by placing them under an NDA, right? And then, even with that NDA in place, a period of time passed and he continued to do the same acts. And he got to keep his job, keeps his title on all these things. To me, that is an abuse. So that's just one example that is really close to kind of home, I guess you can say, because, I'm an IREST instructor. And now, I want nothing to do with that organization too much outside of I want to be able to teach people the practices without teaching people about Dr. Miller and his transgressions with this female. So anyway, I wanted to add that in here to say that that happens all the time, right? That's not necessarily a teacher to student scenario. Other teacher to student scenarios are out there. They're definitely on documentaries. But I did want to throw that out there to everybody and make sure that people understand that that is a real thing that is in the yoga world, from whether they're in organizations that maintain that type of power or turn a blind side to, I thought I stopped sharing, or turned a blind side to um, turn a blind side to that abuse, right? We see that in the media probably more now than we probably ever had, but we see it all the time. So to me, we got to look out for those organizations and warn people of those. And it's really hard a lot of times to separate the person from the practice itself, right? Because sometimes they tarnish it so bad that the practice itself seems tarnished. But it's, something that we're dealing with in the yoga field. So I kind of wanted to throw that back out to everybody. Has anybody ever heard these stories? Know of these stories? And if so, how do you feel about that in the yogic field?
I hear stories like that in the field. So um, for me, I just, it's not going to stop me, I guess you could say. I'm not going to let it hinder me because I do know that it happens everywhere, but it's good to know because yoga is based around an idea of creating a safe space. I
That's
mean,
right.
you're bending over in front of people and you're in different positions and you're talking about accepting each other and it can put you in a very vulnerable situation.
Absolutely. And you're right. I hear of it in every field, but I just feel like in this field going into it and being teachers, I just feel like going into it absolutely you should just be aware of it. And you're right. I don't necessarily think it should stop you. I don't think it's everywhere. Any of those types of things. But I'll say some of the things to look out for is not to call anybody out, so I'll call Brett out. If they keep coming over to correct Brett and only put their hands on Brett while other people are experiencing the same type of um, poor posture or poor poses, but they're only going to Brett to put their hands on Brett, more than likely Brett's probably being sexually harassed, right? I don't want to say all the time because I might, it might be that I'm only going to Brett because I'm the guy and the only other guy in the class might only be Brett. So, I'm going to only correct Brett every single time. But replace Brett with another female, and then I would say, that's probably getting on the borderline of inappropriate because now they're coming and putting their hands only on one person. So again, I'll also say another warning sign would be if you go to a class and not just that they're going to one person and you are that person or whatever, but also if they're also not trying to explain the pose before they put their hands on people, right? I would view that as another red flag. Um, just because, again, it creates loose boundaries around those things, right? If you can't talk somebody into the pose, you know, putting your hands on them should be the last thing that you do. There should be multiple things that you do before you go and put your hands on somebody to put them in a pose. Just now catching up with the chat. She's Nicole. I guess I live under a rock until I took this class. I did not know of particular cases. You know, that is probably good, but I think now that you're, moving into being a yoga teacher, I do think it's important definitely for yoga teachers to know some of these things. And then I seen Linda Brickham was the main the big documentary that took place. And yes, he sexually assaulted I forget how many people, and it was anyway, but these are the cases that we hear. He was not the only one, but he turned into a big guru. There's another one that that was more of a celebrity guru that I think is either on Netflix or HBO. And, they didn't necessarily sexually harass anybody, but they took money and lots of money from all kinds of people. So, if it's not even on the sexual harassment side, then it's even on the taking advantage of you on this, this financial side. So, one way or the other, they're taking advantage of people. And those stories do exist. And again, us as yoga instructors, we need to kind of be aware of that so we can educate people around the dangers of yoga. Not just that you could tear your, your Achilles or, whatever it is, but the dangers that if you go into a yoga class anywhere in the country to be aware that again, people should try to talk you into poses instead of touching you. If they are touching you, what does that really mean, right? And are they touching you in all the appropriate places, right? Are they just barely tapping you on your shoulder to say, hey, you need to move this shoulder forward? Or are they literally almost aligning their bodies and touching your entire body with their body to try to show you the pose? I would almost say that's inappropriate unless there's some medical reason that you have to show that pose that way. I couldn't think of too many medical reasons, but maybe like, somebody has a handicap of Bell's or trying to think of like muscular dystrophy, but they need to kind of lift their arm up a little bit more. They can lift their arm up, so you just kind of help them lift their arm up, right? Like that makes more sense to me than anything else. Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
So I kind of think like maybe because I've been in education for most of my life, uh, the whole touching thing. Like I was a baseball coach for 12 years. I never touched any of the players. I modeled. I use verbal. So I feel like that's kind of a transferable analogy. Like you don't. I just don't feel like I'd ever have to touch anyone. Like
That's
if I
right.
can't show them and I can't walk them through it, then maybe I'm not doing a very good job.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy. And even with baseball, right? Like maybe you come by and you tap up their elbow to make sure their elbow's up, right? But you're not getting behind them, wrapping your entire arms around their body, putting your hands over their hands on the bat, and then showing them how to swing to where almost your genitals are on their butt, right? So those are the things to think about, right? Is if you go up and you put almost your entire body on somebody, more than likely there could be some type of physical touch that people are uncomfortable with. And again, to Brett's point, being a teacher, I'm sure everyone here has had to model and or talk people into the things that you need them to. I say you all are probably more of an expert at that than I ever will be, but definitely keep that in mind as you're doing yoga too. All right, let's see. Any other questions or comments about ethics and yoga practice? Then I think we are actually done for today. So I am going to cancel Friday, and then Tuesday we can meet at Fox Meadows and we will do all the yoga practice. So bring your mats if you're coming. I know there's some people who submitted videos to me. If you submitted a video to me, I have not reviewed it yet, but what I'll do is I'll review it. I'll send you an email and then we'll meet one-on-one and review, just kind of go over how the class went, what went good, the good, bad, and ugly, and then that'll be it. Whenever, for everybody here who will be there on Tuesday, literally the day will go whoever volunteers first. Maybe if people are having a hard time, going, maybe I start pinpointing and calling people out. But the goal is you do your practice. Maybe we say what kind of was good, what we liked about the practice, much like we've kind of done in class, and then the next person will go. We could even be in a big circle. So Emily says she'll go first on Tuesday. She's already volunteering. We already got a list going. I'll also say the other thing, so that's that. That'll be the end of the program will be Tuesday, unless for some reason you sent me a video and we just hadn't got it done yet. We'll try to knock those out the best we can over time, but that won't hinder you from getting your certificate and things like that. So, and definitely getting your PD for everything. For PD, everybody who completes the program passes their teacher evaluation. I was working with Liz, but I will have to work with somebody else now. I think it's Amanda Shoup who I'll be working with to get all those pieces in there. Yes, pretty much everybody who will be there on Tuesday. So if Emily's going first, will be her participants and going through her flow with her. And then go that way. So yeah, that's exactly how it'll go. So then once Emily's done, let's just say Patty, you're the next one up. I'm not volunteering you, but then she would just come back into the audience, or if we're in one big circle, then maybe we just stay where we're at, go around the circle that way. But we'll work it that way. But if it's you just need to get in front of the class, and then you would be the next one teaching, and then we'll go from there. That's right. That's right. Take it easy, Emily. Emily's definitely the fast-paced yoga person, so we're probably going to be in there. She's probably going to turn up the heat. That's why she wants to go first. She's going to turn up the heat and get us all nice and hot at 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. And then once we're done that day, then we're done as far as I'm concerned. As far as the checklist, I know some people had questions about the checklist. I am not caught up on the checklist. So definitely if you submitted things over the weekend or even probably a week before that, I have not caught up on those things. So if something's missing or not checked on there, it could be that I have it. I just haven't actually laid eyes on it and reviewed it. So, but I plan on catching all of that stuff up by Friday. So, and then I'll send that out to everybody on Friday. The checklist will be up to date. Everything that I have will be in there. And then that'll be the checklist. And then Tuesday we'll knock everything out. And for the people who submitted the videos, I'll start emailing people to set up our times probably tomorrow to set up times for our one-on-ones to kind of go over the video. But outside of that, I think we're done for the night. Unless anybody else has any other questions, comments, concerns.